this whole thing could be, you'd get the same emotional level out of an attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent war that you got out of the preceding depression, in the sense that they both caused emotional turmoil from different causes, but the levels were the same.
Now, what if, let's say, China came along and did the same thing? That would be catastrophic to our economy.
Yes.
That could put us down and out. Could it be?
I think you could change that to would.
Really?
I mean, economically, if the dollar is such a strange little house of cards anyway, it has no real value. It's not backed by anything other than the, quote, faith of an best effort or something of the government of the United States, which we all know isn't that good anymore, as they keep demonstrating repeatedly on TV.
Yes, that's true.
so given that, however, the good news is, hey, Guy, the United States, that is to say our geopolitical, or our nation state here, has been through 4 currency crashes before.
Yeah, right.
We've been wiped out before. We've hit rock bottom. Frequently, that's what you need to do.
Except this time, and Cliff, I may be mistaken, but this time it is on such a grand scale. And our country basically, because I don't know if it was before, but our country basically now is owned by foreign governments.
That's kind of new, yeah.
And if this did, come about, what would preclude these countries of literally coming over here and say, hey, I own this. I'm taking over. Now, of course, it would cause a war.
Yeah, and that may certainly be in the cards, so to speak. I mean, we can't rule that out.
Billy Meyer said that if George Bush was reelected, we would have World War III. And it sure looks as though that might come about.
There's the rub. I mean, you get certain personalities that are obviously living out their own karma within our metadata layers here, and there are some personalities that aren't too well adapted to dealing with this militancy and aggression issue, and I think we've got one of them.
Who's that?
I mean, it just, doesn't give you a great faith that things will work out. However, I mean, the good side of it is that the United States isn't owned by the government. The United States isn't really controlled by the government. It's the government is only allowed to think that it's in control. Periodically, we have these great upheavals where people run around in vast amounts of craziness and change things at a radical level. One need only think of the recent remark about, they're poor people. This relocation is good for them. To notice the analogy to let them eat cake.
Yeah, right, exactly. I was going to say that.
So, hey, maybe another one of those metadata layers is going to be this rebellion we keep picking up.
Let's take it a step further now. In pre-9/11, FEMA came out with a statement that said 3 major events, if they happen, would put the United States down on its knees. One was a terrorist act in New York City. The second was a devastating hurricane at New Orleans. And the third was a major earthquake, and I think they specifically said San Francisco, but Clif, it could be anywhere. I mean, Southern California would have the same result.
Or Pacific Northwest or New Madrid, it wouldn't make much difference, right?
Yeah, but they did say San Francisco, like maybe they have some inside information. I'm not sure.
Or maybe they're just having a psychic leak day.
Well,
you give them 1 out of 3. Hey, that's a psychic leak.
Yeah.
2 out of 3. Boy, that's a really good psychic leak.
Yeah, but how about 3 out of 3?
3 out of 3?
Scary. Too scary, because have you, in any of your runs, been able to pick up any reference or information on the manipulation of weather?
Sure, we get it all the time. The question is it meaningful?
Do. Wow. Can you share with us what you have found?
Nothing that you couldn't find just by going and reading the the same kind of articles discussing it at a conscious level. Let's imagine that we're in a giant stream of information, and the stuff in the middle of the stream, which we'll call the mainstream, is relatively sanitized, if you will, for the general consumption. The really interesting stuff happens out at the fringe. Unfortunately, at some point within the fringe level stuff, you cross a layer whereby the conscious interpretation of it matches the subconscious, so you kind of have to discard it.
Oh.
Make sense? The sample size is so small relative to the overall population size that the word screening effects you get are minimized.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're picking up some of it. There's a fair amount of discussion. It's growing. It's nascent. It's not particularly overwhelming, and it's not particularly, from our viewpoint, illustrative of anything, because we just keep coming back to having to delve down into the detail, and that's, again, where we get back to the conscious mind, and we have a tendency to sort of discard that.
Okay. What about the fact, and I think you came up, quite some time ago, about the possibility of an event against Bush?
No, it isn't quite that way, okay? We've got to be, again, sort of seriously clear about it.
Yeah.
It's a period of time in which will be flavored by the idea of a wounding or something along those lines, right? But it doesn't say, I mean, that could be emotional. I mean, certainly you'd have to say that he's in a period of time right at the moment where he's emotionally wounded.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got to be very careful about our interpretation, because we keep coming up with the emotional words rather than, as people are demanding from us all the time, a physical description.
Yeah.
And we get some physical descriptions that turn out to be amazingly accurate when they pop up. For instance, I think over on George's site, you can find some of the historical references to the stuff we did with the snipers. Everybody's running around saying, lone nut job white guy in a white van, and we kept saying, even at that time, well, at the risk of sounding contrarian, no, you're wrong. It's two people. They have an Islamic association. They have a military association. Blah 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 blah.
And they were black, I think you said.
Correct. And they each had this relationship to each other because we were picking up this emotional component of it all.
Cliff, how the hell did you... I mean, that to me, because as you said, the police, the news services and everything else came up with the description of a disgruntled white guy. I think he was in his 40s or blah, blah. But you came up with an exact description of...
We came up with a more meaningful one. Let's leave the word exact out of any description of our work.
My gosh, man. I mean, but that truly is astounding.
It was a good one. I was pleased with that,
Yeah.
Especially since we actually had a very good physical description of what turned out to be the guy's insignia from the military. Now, it was George Ure that put those two together. All I did was come up with a description of the insignia, the globe, and all this other stuff.
Jeez. My gosh.
Psychic leakage, right? Where was it coming from?
Well, I guess so. I mean, if that was a leakage, it was more like a flood.
We've had a couple of those. And we kept getting this thing for a terrible marine disaster. Ships at sea didn't know how to interpret this. Terrible.
Yeah.
And of course, it was the Columbia space shuttle disaster, because Columbia, the gem of the ocean.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And you go back later and then look at the description, and it's like, it's makes the skin crawl a bit. Yeah.
Well, it's like hindsight's always 20/20. But geez, if we could only be able to interpret the information you come up with, let's say pre-event, if you could get people that would listen to you, we could probably stop a lot of very, very terrible things, or maybe natural disasters too.
It may be possible. I don't know. That goes to the nature of time, and that then you get into some really strange speculation. And I would invite everybody to read Daniel Dennett's discussion of consciousness before they get too far into speculating about the nature of time.
Cliff, in your runs, and I think more on a personal level for you, and definitely for me, because you and I both have such a tie into and a great interest into the spiritual aspect. What comes out of the different runs that you do, and let's say dealing in the spiritual aspect of humanity?
Well, the kind of weirdnesses we get are apparently showing up in what we're labeling as our metadata layer. It may be that you could use language in a method like this to actually validate that we are all operating under certain influences that appear to change. Now, where they're coming from and why and so on is an honest spiritual kind of a discussion, right? Mm-hmm. Where do these waves come from? Why do we all respond to them the way we do?
Yeah.
We're obviously all vibrations in and of ourselves, and so it makes sense that we respond to vibrations, light, sound, all the others.
Sure.
And so it also makes sense that we would respond to emotional vibrations that might be coming from someplace. And within that whole context, we get a huge, very rich layer of subject matter that we don't really usually report on. But some things that we notice coming out of there, for instance, is that we're very definitely encountering a substantial shift that, when applied